A couple minutes, let people in. It's always been difficult to like pick that perfect time zone, the time for everybody's time zone. Give it 30 more seconds, and then we will start. Well, we'll give this a start. We're live streaming this also, so we will start this. So welcome everyone to our Women Leaders Shaping Change, Changing the Planet panel, where we'll be learning from some amazing women, the role of women to influence, drive, and expedite sustainability. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I thank all of the panelists for sharing your time and sharing all of your wisdom and expertise in the work that you do in sustainability. This is our last panel discussion of our Trees and Seas event. This is almost a 2-week event that really brings together communities that are working to build sustainably within their own communities and lead their communities in being more sustainable. The Trees and Seas event is an outlook to really highlight that we are all interconnected, that we have to preserve, in order to conserve our oceans, we also have to conserve our land, and we have to really see our problems of sustainability as an interconnected systems approach view of building and solving our problems, global problems like plastic pollution. We've had an amazing lineup of panels this week, really highlighting the different types of groups and voices that really represent the multitude of communities, from youth to educators to women leaders to the different aspects of community development. And one of the reasons I think that ending our week of webinars with women is so important. It really highlights that not only do women make up 50%, probably more than 50% of our world population, it really highlights that it's not just equal representation of everybody's voices, but really highlighting what those voices represent in terms of the workload. And a lot of work, and I think we're going to hear from all the panelists, women do play a critical role in building our communities, in developing the education of our communities, educating the next generation, and really driving a real influence in our economic system. I want to just go over a little bit of the housekeeping there. Please use the Q&A section if you have any questions, and we'll try to answer them and ask them during the talk. If you would like to learn more, please follow us at Plastic Oceans and Trees and Seas Festival on Instagram. You can also learn more about our events for this weekend at treesandseas.earth. I'd like to first start off introducing our panelists. And the first panelist is Tiffany Nguyen. I think we have your slide up here. Thank you. Let's see. Tiffany is a writer, an explorer, and inspirational speaker. She holds degrees from UCLA and the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She spent several years working in renewable energy law in Los Angeles before a scuba diving trip in the Galapagos, which I can't wait to learn a little bit more about. And she now is a writer about the oceans and climate and the environment from her beautiful home in the Florida Keys. And at base, she believes that we can and must do better. And she is a editor at Ecowatch, so you can learn more about what she does there as well. Please go to ecowatch.org to learn more. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Great. And our next speaker is Miriam Weston. Miriam Weston is an engineer in sustainable development and a master's in conservation leadership candidate at the University of Cambridge with a passion for wildlife conservation and sustainable social development. She's worked for more than 6 years promoting and developing sustainable community-based conservation strategies for biodiversity. She has worked with Animal Karma, WWF Mexico, and Panthera Mexico. She is a contributor to the Small Wildcat Conservation Foundation through the coordination of the Ocelot Working Group. You can learn more about animalkarma.org and her work. Thank you so much, Mariam, for joining us. I really look forward to learning more about what you do.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and nice to meet all the panelists and the people that it's joining.
We also have our next speaker, Daniella Hill. She is the founder and director of Amiguitos del Oceano. And sorry, give me a second here, sorry about that. She has a master's degree in environmental management, holds a diploma in planning and strategies for biodiversity conservation. She's very passionate about the ocean and all of its creatures, shares her love as an advanced diving instructor, and she's participated in the ISMAC TEDx speaker for education for conservation. She's currently the country coordinator at Red de Educación and the founder and director of Amiguitos del Oceano. And she's also part of a member of our Blue Communities initiative at Plastic Oceans. Thank you, Daniela. It's great to see you again.
Hi, everybody, and thanks a lot for having me here and sharing with these amazing girls. Thank you.
And finally, but last but not least, we have Tiffany Clement with us. She's the project manager for Canada and the Northeastern USA for One Tree Planted. With a background in tree planting, international development, wilderness therapy, and the intersection of climate change and health, Tiffany manages tree planting projects for One Tree Planted in Canada and Northeastern USA. Tiffany believes taking care of the environment promotes individual and community well-being, and you can find her often in the woods, on the water, or exploring the mountains as often as possible. And you can learn more about her at One Tree Planted as well. It's incredible to hear your backgrounds. Just like reading, I've read them before, but even to hear them all again, I mean, the diversity of your backgrounds, the knowledge that you hold, and really how you've like brought together everything is really, really impressive. And I'm so grateful for all of you to be here today. We're gonna just start off a little bit. If you could just tell us about your work, the organizations, and what you do, just a little bit more from all of you. And we'll start with Tiffany.
Sure. So as Julie mentioned, I am a writer at Ecowatch. I also manage a lot of their kind of social initiatives, especially in pushing forward in amplifying diverse voices of all sorts. So this perfectly aligns with what we stand for. We're an environmental newspaper. We started in 2005 as a physical, but now we're purely digital. We have a readership of about 2 million readers. And our goal is to create a sustainable future by empowering people to know and to choose better for themselves and for society. And we do that by amplifying, who's telling the stories, who we're featuring, and most importantly, solutions that work for everyone around the globe.
Fantastic. And you, Mariam?
Well, I'm Miriam Weston. I am an engineer in sustainable development, as you just mentioned. I just finished an MPhil in conservation leadership here in the University of Cambridge, which is basically a master's to develop your network and improve your leadership skills to improve how we do and perceive conservation. And before that, I was the project director of Animal Karma Foundation, which I no longer work with, but I still am supervising some of the projects there. And for them, I was developing and implementing conservation projects, primarily focusing on wildcats with jaguars, pumas, but also small cats. And a center of the conservation projects that I was in charge of was community-based conservation, and was a lot of, developing the right strategies that are successful for conservation, that will allow coexistence, but also that will take in consideration the human needs, so they can go all the way long into the future.
Amazing, thank you. And Daniella?
I'm director of Amiguitos del Oceano Foundation. Is a nonprofit. We work with people in the ocean through ocean literacy and trying to do personal and experimental activities, beach cleanups, underwater cleanups, science field trips, educational programs. We have been working in coastal communities in Ecuador, which I'm from, since 2018, and we have been reaching more than 15,000 people in these educational processes. And we aim for people to be inspired, especially kids, and to take action for behavior changing and practices, and also getting involved to their parents. So we are ocean lovers, and we try to share ocean with education.
Excellent, amazing. And Stephanie?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you all, and I'm really delighted to be here. So I am, as Julie mentioned, I work for One Tree Planted, which is a nonprofit organization, and we're focused on global reforestation and restoration. So Daniella was saying she loves oceans, we love trees, and mangroves are part of that, so we love oceans too. But I manage our projects across Canada, doing reforestation of all kinds, both on watersheds and deforested areas, agricultural lands. But in my past lives, many different lives, worked as a tree planter, actually planting those trees in Western Canada, as well as being in several different positions that worked on education in the conservation field. So absolutely delighted to be here and having this conversation, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you for bringing that up, as that it's not, again, this is a part of the Trees and Seas Festival, and it is so important to start seeing things as one planet. And it is just as important about the trees and protecting the land as it is the ocean, and because they are so interconnected. As we come to the next question, a lot of, as we talk about sustainability and really I see sustainability starts with our communities and what makes up our communities. And in that conversation of where responsibility and accountability lies, the conversation always is like, oh, we're all equal, but we hold different responsibilities and roles in how much responsibility we have in our communities, and how much responsibility and actions fall on different members. And a lot would say that falls a lot on women, and women play a very bigger role than some in our communities. I'd love to hear your perspective on how you think the female perspective pushes the sustainability movement, given the role of women in education and family and really community development, storytelling, and just love to hear your perspective. Tiffany?
Sure. Traditionally, across almost all cultures, women, are from micro, like within the home, to macro, like societal, even if it is below the like official surface, are the ones shepherding resources, caretaking for young, educating, and creating for the next generation, not just that first level of awareness of others, of the planet, of the idea of stewardship and doing right, but also in watching where resources go. Like at least in my home, it was my mom and my aunts who did the grocery shopping, did the cooking, and it's very traditional sounding, but that is the reality for many, many places and many, many women. And when we keep women in mind as we build these bigger societal structures and we try to solve things like climate change and ocean plastic, we keep a more collective mindset in place. Like my mom would never let something go to waste, right? You don't throw food away, you reuse something, you patch, right? It's not just buy something new and shiny and fix. It's how do we best steward for the whole family or for the whole community or for the whole planet? And I think that's, it's a very female perspective. And if we can take that forward into broader solution thinking, we can make solutions that don't just fix one problem, but because we're circular, right? The whole globe is circular. And if we're like, oh, look, I solved plastics, but I did it by dumping chemicals into the ocean, you're not solving anything. We have to take this circular communal mindset towards our problem solving at a high level in order to make solutions that really effectively address what we need to.
Oh, absolutely. And Mariam?
Oh, I think I forgot to mention that I'm from Mexico and I work most of the time in Mexico and Latin America. So in my experience, I believe women are the real shepherds of the house, if that makes sense, the real pushers of the in-house structure, but also like they build the community structure as well. Sometimes even if they don't have the, you know, the real banner that they're the community leaders, in reality, behind the scenes, they are the ones that move all the ropes and all the threads. I believe that women have this power of influencing in a calm way, in a, you know, more sensible, more empathical way, and treating extremely important matters related to the environment. This type of approach is more than necessary. And also, when I work in the field, one of the most important things for me is to approach women, because I know that they will be the ones like deciding on the economy of the family at the end. So for me, it's very important to have them on my side, no, and to understand their perceptions and to understand their local context, so I can tailor solutions according to their context, which will help develop more realistic conservation strategies, you know, because in conservation, there's no one size fit all solutions, and women play a very important role in this, no, because women and men interact differently with the environment. They also have different relationships with the environment, but also they have different perceptions and knowledge of the environment. So when you come to finding solutions for such wicked problems related to sustainability, climate change, biodiversity loss, it's very important to hear those voices, hear those perceptions, and tailor your solutions according to those contexts. So yeah, like having the feminine vision or the female vision in our conservation strategies, it's for me the way to do it, no?
Definitely. And Daniella, you work with really educating kids and about the ocean, and how important is it in that line of work really to engage the female perspective?
I think it has to do what Tiffany and Mariam just said. I was thinking of them and what I was also thinking to say, and we are all connected thinking about the importance of the women, of the role inside the family, and how that approaches, you know, external activities and strategy. I think a lot of women don't realize the power we have. I think it's not a coincidence that women are the ones who hold life inside us. Also, it's not a coincidence that nature also speaks through us. For example, moon phases and menstruation cycle, we are mostly water in our bodies. And I mean, I think everybody has a connection with nature, but women, as Mariam just said, experience this connection more physically and emotionally. I think this kind of connection is what makes us be more open to sense not only nature beauty, but also these problems and solutions. And this is also what we see in our ancestors. Women are more into caring and protecting life in all its forms. And I think that's Tiffany was just saying about, you know, our mothers and our grandmothers, and how these women ancestors were caring our families. And because of the education, women are also caring inside the family about the education, transmitting values. They make us be more, they are more involved in family economy in our daily activities. And I think this is exactly what women have been doing for a lifetime, and we're still doing that. So this Pachamama sense and perception is what makes us having another insight of conservation and sustainability. And this sustainability is a kind of pathway for caring and protecting all these kind of life forms that we can name.
Definitely.
So education is also part of that.
And Stephanie, it'll be the same similar question, but it's interesting. Recently, I read it when I read Homo sapiens, but somebody had phrased it differently, that I had a little bit of an aha moment about like where in history did women lose sort of a voice, a power. And somebody had mentioned it in light of farming, or really farming and agriculture was that point. This is thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, but that was the point where humans were able to take control and start planting what we wanted to plant, but it also then divided land. And now it was something to fight over. It was something now that you needed physical strength. Men started taking over and controlling, and you started to have sort of women having a quieter role in like at home, whereas it's not so much fighting over land. I guess in terms of like one tree, in terms of planting and seeing how it like as a place where women can get involved. It's not just this male dominated space of we need to plant and this is my space, this is not yours, I fight for my territory. I guess how do you engage women to like plant more and see it as our one collective land rather than a divided land? This is my space, your space, and where lines are blurred.
Yeah, that's a really great point and great question. And I think it ties in a lot of what's been said already. Women, around the world, a lot of women are engaged in agriculture, engaged in that physical labor. They are working extremely hard. The women I've worked with in physical labor jobs are some of the hardest working people I have ever met in my life. Being in an environment that is male dominated in forestry and in tree planting, we do have to work harder, and it's oftentimes mind-boggling to our counterparts. But really, I think that effort and that determination shines in jobs where women are traditionally the underdogs or less represented. And I think I did want to tie in a little bit about this sort of intergenerational idea of the education and working hard for our families for the future. I mean, the idea of sustainability is ultimately intergenerational. And when you have women working as hard as we do, especially in that physical space where it's not just, I'm not saying just, but like in the home, there's a ton of cleaning, there's a ton of child rearing, there's all these kinds of things. But when it's proven in a male dominated field, there's a lot of respect that comes out of that. And it's for future generations as well. When you plant a tree, you're thinking for the future. So really you're working for yourself, you're working for other women, and you're working for future generations when you're working with that determination and that stamina and that hardworking attitude in this space.
Definitely, and I love that intergenerational approach is what what allows us to connect intergenerations. I think it is storytelling, and I think this goes to like what Tiffany does, and not like the work you do in writing. Like, what if you could elaborate more on like the power of storytelling on really connecting all of the work that women do from generation to generation, that we are really is laying that foundation for the next generation to grow upon.
Absolutely. I'm obsessed with storytelling. So I'm so glad to receive this question. I think that the work that women do in the house and throughout society is largely unseen and taken for granted. Like we talk about seats at the table, right? Like even if say your mom or your grandma has a seat at the table, she's not sitting there because she's worried about if the soup's going to boil over or if the dessert's baking, while everyone else is sitting and enjoying, she might be off or like clearing dishes, and then you might I get up and I help. And it's hard to make sure that women have an equal say, even if we're trying to give them voice, if they still have all these other obligations to the house, to the community. And I think by amplifying individual stories about successes, about different ways of thinking, about just the importance of other perspectives other than just, the predominant ego-driven, consumerist, male perspective towards our planet, we show people that other things matter, One of my favorite stories I'll share is like in Maine, like traditional like Maine lobsters, that fishery is struggling because of climate change. The lobsters are moving north. So instead of Maine lobsters, they're becoming Nova Scotia lobsters. And a group of women farmers, actually ocean farmers, decided we're going to farm kelp instead. So they're teaching lobstermen to do a regenerative kelp farming. That's a carbon sink that's better for the planet, clearing the water and making sure that people don't lose their jobs, because they were like, these are our communities and we can't let them falter. So telling those stories help amplify solutions like that.
Absolutely. I also, it amplifies, just hearing that story also empowers women to like, it's so often, I think what you say, even your story about how a woman is thinking about multiple things to keep everything going. And you start to take it for granted, even on ourselves, like as females, you're like, well, I guess that's what we're supposed to do. It becomes the norm that you don't think it's worth voicing and saying, hey, this is a real solution. You start to put it on the back burner. And I think culturally, we see it in a lot of different cultures based on if there's a more patriarchal society or not. My mother's from Korea, and I grew up where it was expected that I was supposed to serve, and my brother did not have to clear dishes because that would be weird. That's not his thing. Or even with my husband now, she's like, you're supposed to give him food. You're supposed to help him feed him. And I'm like, well, what am I feeding him for? He's a grown person.
Yes, hands.
But it is those things. Growing up, I never would have challenged that because I didn't hear those stories from other people, from other cultures or other people that shared those stories. So I thought, well, I guess I just have to keep doing it. So almost in that storytelling, you start to empower other women to do other things, to
have a different reality.
And break those norms, I guess, and break those realities. And to Mariam, being from Mexico or just like Latin America, culturally, how do you see storytelling and sharing those stories from a female perspective? How do you see from a cultural point?
It's imperative that we keep doing it as a little girl, and even though right now it's hard to visualize women leading in conservation, especially for Latin America. Like when I was a little girl, I grew up in the 90s, so I was basically watching Animal Planet, and you have all these male leaders like Steve Irwin, leading the conservation movement and through their narrative. But I've never saw like a lot of women there until I start learning about Jane Goodall, learning about other women being empowered and leading into this role. And then I was a little bit discouraged as well, because when I tried to look for similar people like Jane Goodall in my country, it's not visible. And it's not because we don't have them. Over my career, I've met so many leaders, so many women, but they're just not visibilized, no? And something that I have encountered as well is like sometimes we are not loud enough because we are sometimes afraid of, speaking up. And not because we don't want to, but sometimes that it might have impacts in our careers. So I will share with you some stories about this, and just to try to underpin the value of, storytelling, and like why we should keep putting this on the spotlight. So in Mexico, conservation is basically academic led. There's a lot of like research-based conservation, which it's important to have, but it shouldn't be the only thing that we do. Like at the end, publish a paper in a journal, it's great, but is it really conservation? Is it really changing the livelihood of someone? Is it really having an impact for the wildlife? I don't know. I don't think so. But sadly, this is how things are done, no, in the majority of the cases in Mexico. And I start like approaching women in conservation and asking them like, hey, why are you not like trying to do this or that? And they were like, sadly, if you raise your voice against these leading researchers, sometimes this can end your career. If you start like questioning how things are being approached, these can have a backlash effect on your reputation. And like they are so scared about some like figures in power at the moment that they don't speak up. And also something that I encountered when I was working for a natural protected area is like, although all the team and most of the power in the field were women, the leaders were males. And they didn't understand some of like the female perceptions or like the female issues. Mexico, unfortunately, is one of the most, it's one of the most violent countries against women. So of course, sometimes it's hard to go on the field by yourself or like to be asked to go on the middle of the night to certain activities because you're basically afraid for your life. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't do it, no? But sometimes you have to be, you know, understanding of the context. And just like that lack of empathy of the leaders, because there was no female representation on the, you know, top down narrative of the situation, that created also a bigger gap between women trying to approach a power role, no? So these kind of little things, I feel like we should start like highlighting more, putting on the spotlight and talking about it. Because if we're still afraid of these like powerful researchers or like these oppressors at the end, we are not going to change the status quo. And I feel like this is the power of storytelling, like spotlighting more women in power, women doing amazing stuff, so we can inspire others. And like in the future, we can have more women doing conservation.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a really good point that it's almost like terms that we don't know. I think one of the things that we all feel as females is that there is this silent oppression, the psychological safety that we do not have to constantly openly talk about. I think recently I learned the term, we have a lot of emotional labor, which is that we are constantly doing trade-offs because I'm afraid to say it out loud in case I damage this relationship. I'm afraid to voice this because I might lose my job, I might be perceived differently. And that constant emotional labor of trying to gauge how to maintain a relationship going forward, as well as voicing like real concerns, and so that I have that psychological safety to be able to live equally and to be able to truly represent not only the female population, but also my home, my community, my family, my community, and so those 2 points are, I think that is really important that you address. And having that lack of psychological safety, then it goes to the social pressure of the social norm of in reality. And one of the statistics I'm always shocked by is marketing, like all of marketing, 75% of market, like advertisements and things, are targeted to women. And I think, Daniella, you had mentioned earlier, like a lot of the consumer choices are made by women. So now you have this economic social pressure of being, targeted at women, but then women have this like lack of voice to say, this is all crap. How is it? There's a real disconnect. What do you like how do you address some of that with the work that you do, working with kids and knowing that it's their parents that you're trying to educate kids, but you also know that at home, it's their women, it's the moms that are buying buying the supplies, buying the home goods, their food. How do you reconcile and educate the kids and maybe even like use the kids to get to the parents?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's educational in both ways. The kids also educate their parents, in these new kind of feelings and this new stuff that we are looking for. And also the parents are like, for the generation, the stories about our ancestors, they are also spreading that word. I wanted to also agree with Mariam, because as a Latin American country, I was also, when I grew up, I just had like a Jacques Cousteau as a reference, like a male. And then suddenly, in the past of the years, I came up with, with Sylvia Earle, Jane Goodall. But I think also, as Marianne was saying, having like a local or more familiar role women, it's important for us, because sometimes you get to think, okay, that's another kind of world, that's another kind of economic and social situation where Sylvia grew up and where she lives, or these other men. But how about Latin American? And we have a lot of women that have been working in conservation for a long, long time, but they haven't been visibilized. And as Tiffany said, this storytelling also it's a great opportunity for working in that with the kids. We are working to do with kids storytelling about conservation, but we also, in my personal case, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I personally use books and these stories about these women, local and foreign women, to teach her, this local identity, this how to raise her voice, how to be respectful to herself by raising her voice. And it was very surprising for me, because on last March for Women's International Day, I was making a video and I just asked her like that, Orne's name is my daughter's name, and I was like, Orne, what do you think about this day? What is about this date, the March 8th? And she just said to me, and that was the time I realized education through storytelling and books, it's very important, not just saying, about what happened in generation by generation. She said, this is the day where women were fighting for our rights, because in the past, they couldn't study what they wanted, they couldn't work at what they want to do, and they didn't have like the same opportunities that I do have now. And I realized, because sometimes as a mother, as a woman, we have the role to pass through these, these stories, these personal stories, these other women's stories that need to be visibilized, so we don't feel alone. Because as you were saying, Jolie, sometimes social pressure, we have a lot of social pressure, economical pressure, our jobs pressure. And sometimes we as women, we are very emotional and very connected with this kind of other kinds of feeling. We can relate to each other when we talk. For example, right now, these kind of events, these are part of these like safety groups that we can express ourselves, that we can think together of what we can do, what can we improve this inequality that has been going on for a lot of generations. And for like a mother, and also as an educator, we are taking like, we are realizing how this storytelling and how this pasaparola, this how can I connect with other future generations about telling also what was going on 2, 3, 4 generations before ours, so we cannot keep doing the same and we can change. So my daughter, she is very surprised when for example, my grandmother, my daughter, when she's playing and she's jumping and everything, my grandmother says, that the girls, they don't supposed to do that, that's the football and those kind of that's for boys. And I'm like, Grandma, I love you, but times have changed and she can do whatever she wants to do, and be her, let her be free. So also having the kids to know and notice these kind of changes help us to spread the word and help us all, boys and girls, to raise boys and work together, because that's part of the education and the change behavior that we are trying to do right now. And I hope that this can grow more often,
Absolutely. And I only have boys, and it's so important to teach boys that this world was not created by men only. Sometimes you read history books, I was like, oh, wow, the US was only founded by 4 white men, like nobody else had anything to do with the development of this country. So it's just so important to learn about those stories from different perspectives, and that there are amazing female stories. I have I have no idea why I'm plugging it, but there's an amazing kids story book called Rebel Girls. And it's all these stories about these amazing women throughout history. And I constantly read that to my son, who's 12. Now I don't read them to him, but he reads it himself. But there are such amazing like stories there, which I think does help empower women even now. Like when you know that you're teaching your kids that, I've even become more empowered by, through helping him learn.
That's a book that's exactly the book I read to my daughter. And there's a local version in Ecuador that a local university has worked last 4 years ago, I think. So that also makes our kids, whatever we are at, like being more like, okay, this can happen also in my country. I can relate to this woman because she has, she's living in my own context, because it's different if I see somewhere from Europe or from Australia or from United States. We have not the same ancestors, culture, or the backgrounds. And also having this diversity of backgrounds, it's also good for the kids.
Mm-hmm. And Stephanie, I mean, again, you're in as you even said, tree planting does have like a more male dominated feel or like perception. And how do you what's your take on how to engage more women? What are the stories that can be told to engage more females?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many amazing points here that I want to dive into.
You can dive into all of them. Yeah, you can dive into all if you like.
Yeah, but I mean, storytelling, well, first of all, One Tree Planted, a main focus of ours is storytelling, is telling the stories of the people we're working with. And a lot of the times, those stories are women's stories. So that's a huge part of what we do. And because there's so much power in a story, a story can create empathy, it creates bonding relationships, it teaches lessons, it inspires, it's a call to action. There's so many ways to use storytelling in order to create inspiration among women, among youth, like we've been talking about. But I think one huge point, that Daniella brought up, that you've been saying, Julie, is finding male allies is a huge, important part, especially in a world like tree planting, where it is very male dominated. A lot of the times where we are, maybe more afraid to raise our voices, where we're concerned more about the relationship than the future of our position, or whatever the case may be, where there's a discord amongst men and women in an industry. Finding those male allies is also incredibly important. That's a way in the past I've been able to raise my voice, is finding someone who understands what's been happening, who's seen what's been happening, sees the inequities, and is able to come with me to amplify my own voice. And from there, your voice is up, you bring it from there. So that's something, that you've amplified or that you've mentioned about with your boys, that, reading these stories about women to boys, having them be walk alongside women instead of ahead of women. So that was one just big point I wanted to bring up. It's been useful, and it's been, it's not about shunning men or male whatever. It's about utilizing that so that in the future we don't have to have these conversations about why are women so left behind, why don't we have a place at the table. It's using the tools at our disposal as well. Not saying that men are tools, but that came across that way, but it is useful sometimes.
It's such a great point in terms of, we can often get stuck in storytelling where we're trying to just prove ourselves, rather than our objective is to improve, right? We're trying to improve our community, improve our surrounding efficiency. And rather than having to prove ourselves to get to that destination, it is, how do we better collaborate? And that is by finding, and I love that your thing is, it's finding your allies, and whether it's like male allies or the networks, female networks that empower us. How do we strategically start telling these stories that show our objective, rather than having to prove our worth? Because we are worthy and we obviously have value, and spending our time to prove it to ourselves or to others is not, it is sometimes like gets in the way of our objective, and it keeps that polarization. I think that's a great, it's not that I'm trying to prove that I'm better than a man. I'm just trying to get to my objective without being held back by certain forces. And that's a great point. So I really, are there, and then that just goes on to like some other strategies. Like I guess if you could, what are some of the ways that you think that could be better, women can better promote, but we can promote opportunities to engage more women, like into different types of storytelling, into creating allies and networks with our, whether it's through storytelling or even have them get involved in some way. We'll start with Tiffany.
Sure. A couple examples. I mean, first off, like panels, things like this, scholarships, foundations, anything that's like amplifying the importance of this is great, because it can, you never know if like a mentor or like getting a position or something will be that like male ally to hold your spot so you can catch your breath and achieve your goals, say your examples. In my personal work, if someone's like, oh, it's Shark Week, I want a story about sharks, I'm like, great. How about tips from the world's top 9 shark women scientists, right? I make sure to like bring in a female perspective because I can. I'm in a position as the storyteller to be like, okay, I will give you sharks, but it's going to be like, did you know there's these top 9 like badass women who dive and put their hands in sharks and, you know, do all this? You probably don't, because you've heard of the 2 guys who are on Shark Week. So let's talk about the women, you know, and they always have many different stories than you'll see in the traditional narrative, right? Because a woman's going to approach a shark differently than a guy. So in my own personal storytelling, I always do that. Also, if someone's like, I want to feature this, like say a panel, and there isn't a female or BIPOC or queer representative, I'll be like, have we thought about adding one? Like creating a space to bring in more voices is something that I strive to do personally. And then I think just in the broader scheme in society, we can do the same things. Like when we're framing like how we build companies and jobs and organizations. In my past life, I was a renewable energy lawyer. And I remember many of my female partners, not many because there weren't many, all the female partners that I had, which were not many, having to say things like, my 1-year-old daughter doesn't recognize me because I'm not home, you know, creating situations where women don't have to make that choice, carry that, you know, like you were saying, Julie, that emotional labor of like, am I a mom or am I a badass female attorney? Like make a world where we can be both, so they don't have to opt out or they don't have to choose one. And I think by talking about these things as part of like legit country policies, like childcare, education, you know, food, like making food accessible and affordable, by taking away some of that female burden, we help elevate female voices so that we can achieve all the perspectives we want.
Oh, definitely. I love that whole creating space. Like when we do have that ability to hold space, to have that inclusion is perfect. Mariam, what are any thoughts on like strategies to encourage inclusion and engagement?
Like as Tiffany said, like creating a space, it's so important. In my personal experience, creating not only like the voice or the narrative, but also creating the platforms and the structures within the projects that you're implemented that will take into consideration gender equity, it's extremely important. And sometimes we give it for granted, no? Especially, and I'm going to be repeating this a lot, but like understanding the perspectives from the countries that you're working with, like in the UK, in North America, like in the global north, this is way more in advance. But coming from the global south, it's very important that women that it's already empowered creates these platforms and these structures, and never like forgets to make it fair in the process, in the projects, that your project will be fair for creating and delivering and integrating gender equity. And my own experience when I was creating projects, and this might sound that I'm gender biased 100% because maybe I am, because I'm a woman at the end. But for me, it was very important to help put women in powerful positions, no? And in a way, for me, it was very important. Like, it doesn't mean that women, just for being born women, will be better than men doing something. But again, coming from Latin America, where most of your colleagues will be men, as a woman in a powerful position, I will feel entitled and obligated in a way to help others get to the same privileged situation that I was, no? Because I acknowledge that I was privileged enough to be in a leading position already. So kind of my responsibility was to create these structures and these platforms for enabling more inclusion of women, and that we can start shifting this paradigm, no? And in conservation, like in a more like out of my personal experience, there are some guidelines from there is several of them, but there's one that I love from Conservation International, CI, that literally says like some of the overall guidelines that you have to follow is to ensure equal access to the information of your project to all of the people, especially women, because sometimes you won't give this you will give this information to certain actors or stakeholders of a community, but you want to give it to the women, no? All because probably they're not extremely related to the project like directly, but they will be there. So it's important to create equal access to this information. Also ensure equal participation in your project of women and men, and also that the opportunities will create benefits for both of them, not only for men, or like you will, some projects fail because they assume that what they describe as benefits are benefits for all of the community members, but sometimes they might only be benefiting men and not women, no? And I have an example, sorry if I'm talking too much about this, but I have an example from India, for instance. I met this doctor here called Trishant. Trishant is studying how militarization affects conservation. And he was telling us that in India, they started putting monitoring camera traps in different natural protected areas. And then there was like a community backlash because women were used their free time to go to the jungle and like, you know, just to get away from domestic abuse. And by accident, one of these cameras captured one woman going to the bathroom. And because only men were the ones in charge of this project, they were the only ones in charge of revising the monitoring deliveries. And they found these pictures of this woman going to the toilet, no? And they obviously misused this information, and this created a backlash effect on this woman. She was severely hit by her husband, and she was portrayed basically as a bad woman. You know, she received a lot of backlash from her community. And this obviously created a problem for the conservation project, because it became, at the end, it didn't work out, no? Because of obviously of this human abuse to this woman, and because it was not considering the context of the community and how this might affect not only the men in this community, but also the women, no? So all these type of situations are frequently repeated, and because we don't have the structures or the guidelines to incorporate gender equity in our project. So for me, this is very important. Create the structures and take into consideration equity when you're building projects.
No, very important points, because there is a huge safety issue when you don't have those protocols in place and frameworks in place, especially in light. And that just highlights how a cultural differences, the community difference and cultural perspective is so critical, because it is so different depending on where you are and developing these protocols. And then Daniella, I guess we're running out of time a little bit. I guess that just to, you know, as we try to capture more of that cultural perspective and how we amplify different things, how we amplify different, amplify each other and our words and our stories? What are some of, like, quickly, what are your thoughts and perspectives?
Yeah, I think the culture backgrounds that Mariam was telling about are very needed to be put in another perspective. In our case, as in educational spaces that we work with the kids, it's very difficult to change these cultural backgrounds, especially in Latin America, where we have communities where they misunderstood these women, the role of the women sometimes. For example, in the case, for example, in India that Mariam just said. But what we try to do is to work in empathy. I think empathy, it's a great word to think about for women and for men, because this is something that will make us like think about recognizing and understanding the inequality that it has been existing in the past and in the present. And that will make us like trying to think about the stop social pressure that we were talking about and change things. In our educational spaces, we try to engage in the empowerment of the girls, try and make them, having this space, as Tiffany was saying, having like putting in present women, a role of one woman, or taking responsibility, you're going to be in charge of this activity, or what do you think? Or sometimes in our local communities, for example, in the pandemic, when the kids were studying in online, in our communities, they didn't have a lot of internet or equipment. So in a family where they were like 5 or 4, and they have like 3 kids, one of them, the girl, or 2 girls and 1 boy, they prioritize the education of the boy, So creating these new educational spaces where boys and girls can come together and build this empathy, it's also needed to change the new generation's perspective and not being also too much influenced by cultural backgrounds. Because I love our cultural backgrounds, like ancestors and the ocean relationship we had and the nature relationship we had and we have, but there are some things that there are needed to be reform, because as you were all saying, if we are not together in this, we're half a population. I was checking out how many women are in the world. We are almost 50-50. So why are not we listening and empowering and working and taking account of this half the other population? We must do so and try to do this new perspective that we were talking about. So for me, collaboration, it's needed, empathy, it's like the key word for coming together, all of us, and really understand and being, recognizing that these issues are, try to not to still having this gap, but but getting together and move forward together, like we should really do. And also I think collaboration and this kind of spaces and building new data and information. In Latin America, we don't have like a map of what's going on exactly. We have a little information, and this information is also what we need to be, what's going on, what we can be doing better from this, So empathy is for me like the key word for coming all together and work together for equality.
Excellent. And I know we're like running out of time, but I'm going to just go to you, Stephanie, in terms of just what you really do. We're all here to try to protect the environment. It is a trees and seas conservation. How do you, and I love that you have like wilderness therapy. It was part of your intro, but if you could just end on something that how women really engaging with, connecting with the wilderness, connecting with forestry, and your view. You can have the closing remarks here.
Oh boy, no pressure. Well, first, just the word empathy really, I think, strikes a chord, absolutely. And empathy and connection. I mean, if you value someone else first as a human and then make those distinctions, there's so much more that can come out of that connection. And I think that if you're accepting of the people around you, whether or not they're a woman, a man, a kid, whoever, then there's more space to be able to appreciate not only your environment, but your community and everyone who is part of that. So that you know, Daniela, you're saying just empathy and connection is just core and center, I think, to being able to work forward and work again for that sustainable, that forward thinking intergenerational future. And I'm going to stop there because I know we're short on time, but closing remarks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's you bring such amazing perspectives. You've connected to not only the environment, you connect to your communities, connect to each other. Thank you for sharing all of your storytelling, collaboration, and words of wisdom. Thank you for closing out our Trees and Seas panels. And I am super excited to work with you, work alongside with you, follow your lead. And I hope we will be sharing all of your information and background, and we will have everybody hopefully joining our spaces and empowering the females going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.